And then the final story we're going to talk about today is one that you actually broke. You had an exclusive on the uptick in Israeli citizens applying for gun permits. And we actually got confirmation on a hard number on what that looks like. If you want to tell us what you found out in your reporting.
Yeah, so I spoke with a member of the Israeli parliament who oversees the gun licensing there. And he said that they've had 150,000 applications. That was the estimate he gave over the past month, in the month since the October 7th attacks by Hamas. And that is an unprecedented amount in Israel. He said that was the equivalent of 3 years of applications. Usually they get between 40 and 50,000 a year, and they had 150,000 in less than a month. So it gives you really good insight into the reaction from Israeli civilians to the sort of horrific slaughter that we saw, that the whole world saw on October 7th. So, I think that's pretty significant. It's, it dovetails with what we saw in Ukraine during the initial invasion by the Russians. And it also dovetails with what we've seen here in the United States from Jewish Americans who are also understandably concerned about the terror attacks in Israel on October 7th. And they have also gone out and bought a lot of guns and gotten new training, and which is reporting that we've done previous to this as well. So, a pretty unprecedented situation in Israel as far as civilian gun ownership goes there. And one that I think could have implications, as well for the future of gun regulation in that country, and maybe in other countries as well. I don't know.
Yeah, no, it's interesting because obviously Israel is different than America. I know a lot of American gun owners like to look at these things through American cultural eyes, but they don't have a Second Amendment in Israel. It's not the same type of gun culture. So to see this enormous uptick in people looking to exercise some form of gun rights, even though it's not a Second Amendment based right, is certainly notable in a country like that, especially when they have the precedent of what, the heroism that they saw from sort of paramilitary, basically civilian gun owners in these kibbutzes during that horrible attack where people in the community took up arms and defended whole communities during that terrible terrorist attack. So certainly looks like a potential cultural turning point, but we'll obviously have to wait and see.
Yeah, Simcha Rothman, who was the Israeli politician that I interviewed for this piece, he pointed to those exact situations as inspiration for people in Israel. So some of these successful defenses of the communities in the South, where they have they're like community security agencies. Essentially, they're not. He called them semi-military. I don't know that we have an equivalent to that here in the United States.
Right.
But maybe National Guard to something like that. But it's a little different. It's just not a similar political situation. We don't have Hamas on our border like they do. So, it's not quite the same thing. Maybe a sheriff's department you might compare it to. But regardless, that example of people defending their community successfully during these attacks, while 1,400 people were murdered, has driven a lot of other people to go and get armed. The cultural difference is very significant with gun ownership in Israel compared to the United States. Like you said, it's not a right there. You also basically you can only own handguns was the implication he was giving. These permits only apply to handguns. They are kind of a combination of a permit to own and permit to carry. So you don't have to get a separate carry permit if you get a gun permit, but you have to live in a special zone that the government considers particularly unsafe to get one of these, or you have to have been served a specific kind of role in the military previously, a combatant. They have opened up some of these things, some of the eligibility since the attack. Now I guess combat veterans are the largest group who are eligible for these. And so, and keep in mind, this is a country of about 9.5 million people. So 150,000 permits in a month, that's a lot for a country that size, especially considering on the other end of it, they don't have the same tradition of civilian gun ownership as we do in the United States, but they also have a culture where military service is mandatory for most people. So they aren't necessarily unfamiliar with firearms either. They're familiar with them in a different context, which is, mandatory military service. And obviously they have a lot of the able-bodied men are being called up to the reserves and they're being armed with military firearms, with rifles and that nature. So they take a very different approach than we do to guns, but it's not something where, everyone there is unarmed all the time and have no understanding of how to use firearms. It's just a very different cultural approach than we have